Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live. We come to you every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Tuesdays, we do pitch decks. Every Wednesday, we do traction, growth hacking, marketing, customer acquisition. So wanted to get you all prepped and prepared and say, hey, if you've got questions, use the Q&A box. We have the lovely Jen, who is going to be watching the chitter chatter and making sure that she prioritizes, make sure we ask the right questions. Not only do you ask the right questions, but she gets the right questions to us so we can all answer them together. We have joining us, as always, Ryan Ratan as Chief Marketing Officer.
You're here too, Ed. It is true. You're also here.
I get to count myself in on this. Ryan, he'll introduce himself in just a moment, but want to also welcome Mr. JD Miller, who is one of our community leaders and is going to be helping us out today. And we're going to be having a great discussion today. Just to give you all a little bit of heads up, we have been going through some of these marketing axioms from Ryan, such as know your customer. These are things that we need every founder to know, such as perfect your value proposition, what it means to do that. We talked about that last episode, and be where your customers are. Talked about that. And then now we're going to be talking about make your funnel clear and frictionless today, and stop selling, start helping. It's going to be an interesting conversation for sure. I'm sure we're going to have lots of opinions. But once again, everybody make sure hit that Q&A box or the chat and ask the questions. If you're joining us on YouTube, thank you so much. Do the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe, share it. We always want to hear feedback. And remember, we want to prioritize your questions. You can hijack this meeting with your Q&A and we will get right to it. That's going to be extremely helpful for us. It's fun, and we want to make it as entertaining as possible. First off, let's introduce JD. JD, share with us who you are, what you do, how you help founders, what's going on in your life.
Sure, thanks. So quick background, about 18 years in the B2B sales space, both in the US and the UK. I live in San Francisco, so I'm surrounded, as you might imagine, by all sorts of startups and startup people. So I work with a lot of small businesses and startups, but the focus tends to be more startups, just given geographically where I am. But I help startups specifically do everything from kind of very early stage strategization all the way through, in my role as a fractional CRO, helping run, manage, set up sales teams, sales processes, train on sales methodologies, anything start to finish, A to Z in the B2B sales universe, really.
Fantastic. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Mr. Ryan Ratan, I've got a question for you as our Chief Marketing Officer. What's with this list? Why is this list so important? You said, like I asked you, literally, I said, hey, what should all founders need to know? What do we need to cover? And you sent me this: know your customer, perfect your value proposition, be where your customers are, make your funnel clear and frictionless, and stop selling, start helping. What's the origin? Why are we talking about this?
Sure. Well, these things, when you look at them together, taken together, they are a system, right? And they are the system whereby we can begin to acquire customers. When we dig in with founders, which we do every day of the week, and in particular Mondays and Fridays when I'm doing the Getting Customers workshops, these are the areas where we typically see the fundamentals failing, right? We don't have these fundamentals in place, then it becomes fundamentally harder to do our jobs and go out and acquire customers and drive revenue. So that's why we start with these. There are plenty of other things that we need to be able to do, but you asked me last week, like, what are the fundamentals? Like, what are the must-haves? What are the hygiene factors, the things that a founder needs to be super clear on? And these 5 are the ones that routinely come to the top in those sessions, in the one-on-one coaching that I do, that over and over and over again are stopping people from getting where they want to with customer acquisition.
And I know everybody on this call, thank you for joining us. They're going to run to our YouTube channel and start voraciously devouring our past episodes to go through these questions. I know you're all studious. I get it. Everyone's going to check that out. But Ryan, just for the sake of posterity, get the conversation going, summarize for us all the points we talked about last time. So know your customer. What is that?
Sure. Look, this is just having a deep understanding of the customer, right? If we don't have that, we're just guessing. Knowing who they are, what their pain points are, helps you understand everything from how you're going to build your product to how you're going to message it, right? In terms of customer acquisition, knowing who your customer is lets us know where we need to talk to them, how we need to talk to them, and what it's going to take to convert them. The second one, where we're perfect your value proposition. Another place just we see massive failure, right? So people don't buy products, right? You don't want to tell them about your product. People buy solutions. They buy outcomes. They buy transformations. And so being very clear on what that transformation is, what do I get? When do I engage with your product, your service, whatever it is that you offer? What do I come out on the other side? How am I different? And let's see, then the last one was be where your customers are, that we covered last week. This one sounds so common sense, and yet so very frequently what we see is a founder may have come from another business. Maybe they had some experience with another type of marketing. Maybe they're just really comfortable on a particular social media channel, and they end up going there, and they spend their time time there. And they wonder why I'm not getting results there, because they didn't bother to think about, is that where the people I want to sell to actually hang out, right? So making sure that we are where the people we want to talk to are makes a lot of sense, or otherwise you're just shouting off into the void. So I think that's the 35-second summary of what we talked about last time.
That's perfect. So now let's do another quick round. Just again, a reminder, use the Q&A box. I see some questions coming in already, or the chat to ask questions. JD, know your customer, perfect your value proposition, be where your customers are. What would you add to this conversation just so founders get into the zone of what we'll talk about today?
Yeah, absolutely. These are all very key, but there's one that jumps out at me. It's the one on screen now. Be where your customers are. And I get a lot of questions related to that, particularly around cold outreach and how should I use social media? Which social media platform should I use? Obviously you can do cold email, you can do LinkedIn. LinkedIn is key for B2Bs, but then you got, TikTok and X and all the others. And I've had a number of questions, for example, hey, I keep hearing, TikTok is great for B2B. And my question is always, are your customers there? Now, in my opinion, I don't use TikTok. I don't know it. I assume it's a bunch of, teenagers doing dancing videos. Maybe I'm wrong, but are your customers there? If they're not there, it's not a viable outreach channel for you. But LinkedIn, pretty much all the professionals that are, I think, worth doing business with are probably going to be on LinkedIn. So that's probably by default a viable channel. But where else do your customers hang out? Be there, wherever that may be.
I'm telling all my competitors to get on TikTok because it's just about to be banned. That's a power move. You can use that. You're welcome for suggesting this. All my competitors can get a TikTok right now, but I digress. Ryan, let's talk about this. So make your funnel clear and frictionless. I'd like to define first, what is a funnel? We hear this all the time. Give us the basics.
Yeah, the basics are this is how we begin to attract people to a final outcome, right? So the funnel is starting with, where do we begin talking to these people? Once we start talking, what do the interactions look like? So once there's interactions, what are the actions that start to happen, right? Where are we able to take people? So let's say we start with paid search and we catch their attention with a paid search ad. They click on the ad. They're now in our funnel, right? They're now moving closer and closer towards that final outcome that we want to drive them to. Sometimes that's a sale. Sometimes that's some sort of intermediate action, like just signing up for something or joining us at a webinar. So it depends. So you can have a macro funnel, which is, how do we generally make people aware that we exist? How do we attract them into our hemisphere? And then how do we get them to buy stuff? And then there's a lot of little funnels that exist within that to create micro actions or micro sales and lots of other stuff. So that's what the funnel is. It's amazing to me. And look, I've gotten this wrong so many times. Like it's amazing how easy it is to get this wrong, right? I've gotten it wrong far more often than I've gotten it right in terms of making it clear and frictionless. I go back and I'll look at a funnel that I've spent some time on. I evaluate a lot of other people's funnels. And so often the first thing that you feel when you show up at somebody's sales funnel is go away. It's just like they make it. There's a lot of friction. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's clunky language. There's jargon. There's so many things we can do to screw this up. And I think it stems from a desire to try to be far too comprehensive, try to say too much. Right? I very rarely see founders saying too little. They're almost always saying way too much. They're like, but they need to know, but it does this and it does that and it does this and it does that. It's like, remind yourself, this isn't an hour-long infomercial where somebody's bored to tears and can't sleep and they're going to sit there for an hour and you got 4 or 5 seconds to catch people's attention. And then every 2 to 3 seconds, you got to keep re-earning that attention. So keep things simple, keep things streamlined, say less. And look, at the beginning, at the top level of this thing, and we're first thinking about like, where does that funnel begin? It starts with awareness, right? And so when we think about those early actions and activities in sales and marketing, I'm always trying to optimize for awareness, right? I've got to get their attention. Could be through ads, could be through content, could be through partnerships, but we have to have something that makes them aware of that we exist, right? And not just that we exist, but we exist in a context that matters to them. And then it comes down to like, there's lots of technical stuff in here. I want to flip over to JD in a second because he's a consummate sales guy and teaches this stuff day in, day out. And so I think his input on what really makes a clear and frictionless sales funnel is going to be super important. But it's little things, right? Like removing distractions, make your CTA clear, your call to action clear. Try to only have one, right? Nothing worse than showing up on a website where they're calling me to action like 20 or 30 different ways. Right? I'm already a father of 3. If I wanted to be distracted by conflicting interests, I go talk to my kids, right? You want to sell me something, you want to get me to take a specific action, give me one to take, right? And then always make sure, like the other thing that I see routinely, one of the big fails in early stage startups is that they don't nurture people who don't convert immediately. They don't try hard enough to keep people in the funnel. It's sort of like, well, we took our shot. We hit them with an ad. We put them on a landing page. They gave us an email. They went to the checkout page. They didn't buy anything. Damn, we'll try again tomorrow. All right. But they don't circle back around. They're not retouching the same people. And so I think that's the other like critical mistake that I see in terms of not making the funnel clear and frictionless.
Okay, but hang on for a second because I want to ask JD, let's get into explicitly what funnels might look like, especially looking at the audience that we have. I can imagine all different types of funnels. They're not always the same. But if I said my funnel, and this is the funnel that I use, and I basically build around all my social media and building my digital footprint out there, I want them to know me, like me, trust me, and then buy from me. So I have a 4-stage, and that's generally how I think about it, and I've got content and I do different things at every stage, and slowly it squeezes to the point where the smallest percent will actually buy from me. Is that a funnel? Like, am I on the right track if I start thinking that way as a founder?
So everyone's funnel, as you said, is going to look a bit different, but we've all seen the picture of the kind of the upside down or the V-shaped, right? Very wide at the top of funnel. We're trying to get lots and lots of prospects into that. As you said, Ed, we're going to move them through whatever number of steps there are, and everybody's number of steps may be different, may look different, but trying to move them through their buying cycle, our sales cycle, to squeeze those revenue generating customers off the bottom. And they don't all look the same for sure. You might have a 3 or 4 step funnel. You could have a 10 or 12 step funnel. It's really dependent on that company and the process and the steps they need in there.
Give me an example for a second. Like, let's really make it explicit so founders can imagine. So give me an example of some steps of funnels that you've created or helped create for founders, JD.
Yeah, sure. So let's say you're doing some kind of outreach, cold outreach, right? And somebody replies to an email, replies to a linked message, answers a phone call, a cold call, whatever it may be. That may be the entry point for them into your funnel. Some activity has been taken by your prospects, and they're now in your funnel. Now we want to move them through the funnel. So can we move that phone call or that email reply to a meeting? That's then maybe the next step in the funnel. They go from kind of active reply to a meeting step of the funnel. We get to the meeting, we have a conversation. Maybe they want to see a demo. That could be the third step of the funnel, is a demo. Now, from the demo, what's next? Is it a letter of intent to buy? Is it some kind of action to actually buy? Or is there another step that may move them closer to a purchase? But those are what some of the steps will look like, as we're moving them from a prospective client all the way through to a closed won deal, somebody who's giving you money, paying you money for whatever solution you offer, and then closing them out of the funnel.
Right.
Again, those steps will look all totally different.
Ryan, what's an example from you in your experience? Give an example of a funnel so founders can imagine it.
Let me do a really detailed one, and this is one that some of the audience is going to resonate with because it's probably how they ended up here. Right? So let me talk about how we do this. So it's interesting. So JD, you referenced cold email or cold outreach, and one of the things that I've realized with all of the different tools that we have available to us at this point, cold outreach becomes and I know you weren't suggesting like is the first choice. This isn't me saying like you're wrong. This is me just picking up on that and saying, yeah, I've come to this new philosophy where I only use cold outreach if I can't find that person somewhere else where I can warm them up. Right. So it becomes like if I just legitimately cannot discover where this person hangs out, any other means of getting in front of them in some other way first, then cold. So let me tell you about the way that we're using the warm-up funnel now. So it's a couple layered funnel. We'll use LinkedIn because it's one of the best places to execute this. We'll keep it B2B. So starts with that awareness content, right? Ed, you said some smart words before around, I want them to like me, I want them to know me, I want them to understand what I stand for. That first layer does this stuff, right? So typically it'll be some mix of inspirational content, informational content, and a little bit of something I would call more like thought leadership. And I know that that's a term that get banned about. What do I actually mean by that? Something that indicates to people how I think, right? So not just the things that I say that are helpful, but also how I feel about certain things, how I think about a process, not just here's my process. So typically a couple of pieces of content from each one of those in a top layer. That gets published organically, then it gets turned into sponsored content by the company page, just because that's the way LinkedIn works. From that point, anybody that interacts with that, which is a very specific thing on LinkedIn, ad interaction means they liked it, they reacted to it, they commented on it, they clicked read more, they saved it, they shared it. I think that's what constitutes all the ad interactions. That gets them put into a retargeting audience, right? In the retargeting layer, I will do exactly the same thing. Right? So I will just show them more of that same type of content, different 9 pieces of content probably, but very similar philosophy. And they interact with that content. It moves them to another retargeting. This is now where we get to kind of mid funnel. So let's go back to the funnel. So this is upper funnel. I want to know who I am. I want to recognize my face, understand a little bit of what I stand for, how I help people, what I do, and inspire them to want to do some of the same stuff. All that happened up there. Mid funnel, now I want something that's going to bring them a little bit closer. I want something that's got a little bit of friction. They've got to do a thing to get a thing. Maybe they need to comment on a post to get an ebook or a calculator that I've built. Maybe it's a free webinar. Maybe it's just a recorded video, something along those lines. But they've got to give me something, typically an email address, sometimes just a comment, something that makes them lean in a little bit further, a little more friction, so they now have taken action. That layer then moves down to the bottom of the funnel. Once they've done that, again, the beauty of this funnel is that I know what they've interacted with at that point. I don't have to wonder by the time that person's shown up at my webinar if they've ever heard a thing I've said before, because they have to have reacted to at least 2 of my posts at a minimum. They get to the webinar, leave the webinar. Maybe there's a CTA there that brings them further into my funnel, but I won't leave that to chance. I will retarget them again on LinkedIn with a lead form ad and a conversation ad, which is where it inboxes them. Why? Because now, by the time I'm asking them to do something more specific and take a bigger action, I have created awareness. I've created some affinity. I've probably done something that feels like help to them. And so by the time I get down to making that ask of, hey, you want to jump on a call, or hey, you want to book with one of our team, hey, you want to buy something, they've had a chance to understand how invested I am in the overall process and how much I care about their outcome. This completely changes that. By the way, I have tons of data on this if anyone wants to talk about it at some point in terms of how that fundamentally changed. Because we used to just start with lead form ads. Worked okay. Works way better at a much lower cost now because I'm doing more work upfront to help these people understand what it is that we really do and bring them into the funnel in a much warmer way.
That's the perfect segue. You said it. Thank you. Because I know what is going on in founders' minds right now. They just heard you talk about like 5-6-step funnel. JD mentioned a 10-step funnel. And so many of our founders are at that stage where they're just starting and it's like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. So I'm going to break this down. So first, we got to figure out what the step one of the funnel is. So how do you actually start warming that funnel up and loading people into that funnel? And I want to ask a few questions and both of you can jump in. So this comes from us from the chat. So to load the funnel up, you got to know your customer. And so the question was, can you characterize the difference between picking the demographic and interest versus knowing that your customer really is interested in your product enough to pay for it? How do you do that? That's a very common challenge.
I think that it's a bit like asking you to describe someone versus telling me how they think or feel. Who's Ryan? Ryan's a startup founder. He's an expat. He's a soccer player. He does jujitsu. Cool. That's a description of me. So that's the demographic stuff, right? That's that segmentation that we can use to go out and find them somewhere. This helps us understand like maybe where do they hang out? What type of stuff do they read? What problems do they have? Where do they live? How much money do they make? What kind of education do they have? Cool. That's all great. Doesn't tell me enough about how does Ryan feel about some context around like, so let's just say you guys are going to offer me a better fitness tracker, right? So you got to understand a bit about who I am and how I think. You know where to reach me based on that description, right? The descriptive characteristics. But when we get into then the how do I think, how do I feel, what makes me care about this particular problem that you want to solve, that stuff is where we really start to know the customer, right? There's a big difference between knowing who someone is and knowing what they're about. And I think for me, that's the distinction that answers the question that was asked.
Anything to add, JD?
I was going to say, so, and I'm curious to get Ryan, your answer to this. How would you go about, reaching out? You have a prospective audience out there. You don't know how they feel about things. Where are you going to go learn that, or what's the most efficient route you've found to get to that information?
Yep. So let's talk about two things: efficiency and effectiveness. One of my favorite topics in startup land. So there's a very efficient way of doing this. I normally will hold up a copy of the mom test book at this point because this is the process that I would go through. It's going to be customer interviews. There's two ways that we get to some of this information, really. There's probably more than that, but we'll stick with these two. The first one is very efficient, and that would just be going out and looking at existing conversation amongst your target population. So can I find where they're talking about this on Reddit, right? Here's why I'm not happy with my Whoop strap, right? This is why you need to sell me a better fitness strap. I'm actually quite happy with my Whoop strap. Don't take this the wrong way, Will. I'm very happy with my Whoop strap. If I wasn't, right? So then I'm going to be out talking about it on Reddit, maybe a forum somewhere, maybe directly on the Whoop's website, right? Where I can start to see what are people saying? What are the conversations I can take part in without having to take part in a conversation, right? So how can I do customer interview by proxy, right? So this is one of the ways. It's very efficient. I don't find it to be as effective, but it's a great starting point. It helps me to understand the questions that are clearly out there, helps me to understand how people are thinking about it and what other people are answering, right? So it's because there's a dialogue that's existing out there. And so I begin with that process where it's just a bit of the research. And then it's all about picking up the phone, picking up the Zoom, getting people directly engaged and asking them about their problems, not pitching your solution, right? So there's an entire episode that we did that covers the book and the process around the mom test. So definitely worth a listen and great book, worth a read. Grab it. It's $12 and 126 pages, not long. So well worth doing. That process of getting in touch with people and really understanding the language they use, how they feel, what they've already tried, why it still fell short, without asking them to predict the future and say, would you use this? Would you try this? Would you pay this amount for that thing? Asking people to predict the future is a waste of time. But we covered that in ad nauseum in that other episode. That would be where I would start. It's really around customer interview and just having horse's mouth level feedback around what needs to happen.
I was going to say, there's a great story that aligns with what Ryan's talking about from the early days of Salesforce, right? We all know Salesforce, a mildly successful company, you might say, that owns like half of downtown San Francisco, where it seems where I live. So in the very early days, they had a CMO, I believe the very first CMO of Salesforce named Aaron Ross. I forget his background, but successful guy. Marc Benioff came to him and said, hey, I want to go out and do some customer visits with you. So in a book that he wrote called Predictable Revenue, Aaron talked about, I was having the great one. Marc was going to come with me and I was going to get a master class in selling. That's what he expected. He takes Marc along on a number of customer visits, and all Marc did was ask questions. Hey, what do you need from a product like this? What would help you be better? What things can we build into this? He did nothing but customer interviews. and gained a mountain of valuable information that then helped them make Salesforce better. So there's a million stories like that. But that's a bit of a high profile one that comes to mind. And you're totally right.
Perfect illustration.
Let me push this even further because, again, recognizing the founders that are in our audience, I think that you both would advocate for the approach. What I like to do is I don't even talk at first. I go like what you said, Ryan. This is the reason I'm trying to hack Reddit and get really good at Reddit, because I found it to be a treasure trove of customer discovery. So I will literally just scan and read and lurk and get a feel for what everybody's complaining about, what are the common themes, and then I go and ask a really dumb question, and I'll say, hey, I heard this is the regular thing that people do, and this is how they make decisions, and I heard this is frustrating, and I'm experiencing this problem too, and I'll pretend I'm one of these people saying something dumb, and then Reddit jumps all over me and says, you're stupid, here's how it works, and then they just start talking to me, and then I'll respond, and then sometimes, you know what happens? People will message me directly and say, hey, I had this issue too, and I'll be like, can I interview you? Can I ask you? So that's literally the first step, is go where the customers are talking about it, listen to them, and then that will give you the intelligence on how to enter that market. And then if you collect demographic information along the way, that's great. You may find a common theme. Oh, these are all, what we call dinks, dual income, no kids, right? Okay, dinks tend to have, I'm sorry for being crass, tend to have the same type of problem that everybody else has. And so we've talked about that. And so you can combine the two together. But first, the social listening, I think, is something that founders don't do enough.
It's an overlooked one, right? So very frequently as a founder, we end up like thinking about a problem, right? And then we just jump to the solution. We get so caught up in like, what could I do? What could I build? How could I do it? That we forget that there's just a bunch of people out there that eventually we need to go and sell to anyways. That we want to use our product, that we want to change the lives of, that we want to achieve value for. And we forget that they're already sitting out there, and that we should just go and talk to them and understand how they feel about it. And look, you can get a lot done with research. You can get a lot done on the whiteboard. But when you need then to turn the corner and start to market to this audience, when you've had those conversations, you know where the emotional triggers are. You see what makes people lean, and you see what makes people lean back. You see where they raise their eyebrows or let out a long sigh. You start to tap into something that's at a completely different level. It's the same reason why people ask me, well, could we just use surveys to ask these questions? You could. This goes back to efficiency versus effectiveness. It's a very efficient way of getting answers, but it is not an effective way of getting insight, in my opinion, because you miss so many things. I've told the anecdote before where I was building something and sent out a survey sort of querying on the problem, and the problem that people had, they answered in a way that aligned with exactly what I wanted to go build. So then I decided to start building the thing, launched the MVP, put it back out to the same people that said, yes, I have this problem. No, I'm not happy with the solutions, whatever. And then it was like, okay, great. So these people are going to pick this up in droves. Everybody will love this. Instead, no one was using it. I couldn't figure out why. Like, why was there no take rate from 100 people who had all answered in a pattern and within the survey that indicated this would be a perfectly fit for them? So I drank my own Kool-Aid, picked up the phone, started talking to some of these folks. It was actually, Zoom or probably Skype. This is a few years back. And what I found out was, yes, they had this problem. No, they weren't satisfied with the incumbent solutions to it, but they were so frustrated with the platform this was associated with, they didn't even want to try to fix it. They were just like, I just want it to go away. I don't want to work harder. I don't want a solution to it. I just don't want to use it anymore, right? And so had I asked those questions, but the answer to the question was, are you using this tool? Yes. Are you frustrated with this aspect of it? Yes. If it did this, would you be happier? Yes. The question I didn't ask was, are you so frustrated you want to leave this platform altogether and not invest more time in it? Mm-hmm. But I would have seen that, because on the phone, when it's like, are you still using this platform? Yeah. Right? That tells you something. On a survey, that's still coded as yes. Yeah, with the long sigh and the angry voice, tells you something very different than yes. Right? So we got to be careful. Anytime we aim for efficiency, we're not somehow stomping all over the effectiveness of what comes out the other side.
That's perfect. Let me ask you both some bullet round questions to make this very tactical for our founders. So JD, a founder comes to you and says, hey, what do? You explain to him, and then says, well, I need to do this myself. I'm on a shoestring budget. I am starting from ground zero, and I need to build a sales funnel. And I heard you. I listened to Ryan, and he said, make it clear and frictionless. I get it, but where do I start? What's the first thing that you would tell that founder to do?
Well, first, I want to make sure they understand who their audience is, or who they think their audience is, right? And we want to try to drill down into that and make sure their audience is who it should be. And then they're going to need a platform of some sort of CRM or a sales engagement platform to put this information into and track it and work with it. And then, we start testing their theory, their thesis. Is this, is your audience really who you think your audience is? Let's get them, like Ryan said, let's pick up a phone and call them. Let's reach out over email, LinkedIn, X, whatever it may be. Let's engage with these people, ask some questions, and do some learning. It's kind of like what Marc Benioff did on those sales calls. Get out there and ask some questions and validate that who you think is your audience, that they have the problem you think they have. To Ryan's point, that they want to solve the problem, and then start figuring out your solution and how best to approach other people who might spend money with you to solve that problem.
You're saying start off with a thesis. This is what I've researched, what I know about my customer, but you still have to test that thesis doing something. And the shortest way is just hand-to-hand combat, just get in there, pick up the phone, call them.
Yeah, engage. Yeah, because I've seen it. I'm sure we've all seen this. A number of early stage startups who say, my customer is XYZ. They name an industry, a role, a function. They get out there in the real world, and it turns out they were completely 180 degrees off of who they thought they were selling to. So yeah, you got to test it. Before you spend a lot of effort and money, test your thesis.
Okay, Ryan, what would you say do first, or add to what JD said?
Let's just add. So I think that where I see, like, let's take that steps and steps and steps further, right? In terms of like the narrowing down, right? They often pick a segment. Sometimes it fails because they picked the wrong segment. More often what I see is that they fail because the segment that they picked was just too wide. They weren't descriptive enough, right? We have a SaaS solution that helps B2B companies. Where that can start to fail, now that may be absolutely what you do, and that may eventually end up working as messaging. But in the beginning, sometimes we just need to be so much more specific, right? We help B2B companies who sell into the biomed space. The more specific we can get, right? Because when we know exactly who we're talking to, we know what to say. Because if I'm going to talk to a B2B platform that sells data analytics to biomed, right? The way I'm going to approach that conversation versus the way I would approach that if I'm talking to a B2B founder that sells into, I don't know, pick something else, retail checkout optimizations. Okay, extremely different. Now, my solution may work for both of those founders, but if I just say, I help B2B founders with this thing, or I have a SaaS product for these B2B founders, I don't necessarily know you're talking to me. If I'm biomed or I'm e-commerce retail optimizer, I don't necessarily see myself reflected in that. And so I think the thing I'm always encouraging people to do is just narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow until the messaging that you use cannot possibly be ignored by the people you're trying to talk to, because it's so specific, right? Like if somebody were to shout, I think I did this a couple of days ago on maybe the last session, was somebody shouts, "Hey, you," right? All four of us might look, but not really care to react. Somebody screams, "Hey, Baldy," unless anybody's assuming that Jen's not hiding hair under that hat, they're probably talking to me. Right? And so I'm going to be like, what? Right? So we want to make sure that when we send out messaging, it's not easily ignorable. So much of what founders send out, both in terms of direct messaging, the stuff that goes on the website, is just so easily ignored. And that's because they're trying to speak to far too many people at once. So narrow it down, narrow it down, narrow it down. So I would say, JD, you're absolutely right in terms of like, you need to make sure you're talking to the right people. But I'm going to add some nuance to that, which is to say that sometimes the reason we miss that isn't that we miss the entire pool, but we're talking just too broadly to that segment. When we go way deeper and way more narrow, that we start to resonate.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that, so
yeah,
to add some kind of practical stuff to this. If you, as a founder, right, when you start looking out and trying to find your audience out there in the world, and there are these things generally known as B2B contact databases. There's called sales intelligence platforms, but nobody uses that terminology. You go into a Zoom Info and Apollo, a database like that. If you have a very wide audience, you start searching and filtering for that wide audience, you could literally get tens of millions of results.
Yeah,
that's completely unmanageable, right? So you start to filter or niche down, whether it's by geography, company size, job titles, whatever it may be, you can start to get an actually manageable list of people, whether it's a few hundred or a couple thousand. But you want to niche down to that really manageable list and then start from there. Start to build your business, and you figure it out, and then you can start to scope back up.
Say that again, but louder, JD, please. Like it's spot on. It's so spot on. And I think that that's one of those other misconceptions that like people get really excited. Like, yeah, I threw it into LinkedIn and there's like 1.5 million people I can go talk to. Like that's a disaster, right? You can't possibly talk to 1.5 million people and be relevant to all of them.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes, it's possible. Like I shouldn't say that, but the likelihood is if you're that B2B founder who's trying to sell a specific SaaS solution, trying to talk to that 1.5 million versus getting down to that list of 500 people. Like I wish founders would take comfort in that instead. I get way more comfortable. Like I know I've got 500 people to communicate with. I know I can do a really, really good job of communicating with those folks. That's the way I look at it.
Let me double click on that for a moment, because Ryan, what you said is perfect, because we say this all the time. If you sell to everyone, you sell to no one, right?
Yeah.
And so founders don't narrow things down. And I'll use an example for us in our parts of the world. I'll have a founder come to me and say, but Ed, your messaging, I don't care. It doesn't make sense. They'll challenge me. And I'll ask them, I'll say, well, what stage of founder are you? They're like, well, we're raising Series A. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not talking to the Series A founder. I'm talking to the pre-seed founder who's starting from scratch. And therefore, I've honed my messaging to literally shut everybody else out. And that is okay. But founders get insecure and they start clicking everybody together and start cramming that funnel with all those multifaceted messaging personas and ICPs, and then you end up diluting yourself or you lose focus and it doesn't work.
So it's funny, like this, it's just, we could go on about this for a whole hour, I think. But what essentially ends up happening when you do this is that you're putting the burden of understanding on all of those users. They have to figure out why you're relevant to them. Big mistake, right? This thing my dad used to say, communication is the burden of the sender, right? It is our job to clearly communicate what they need to understand. The minute it's like, well, we put out the vanilla messaging, the broad blanket, whatever, this thing that appeals theoretically to everyone, it means they have to figure out what of that is specifically relevant to me. I have to do the homework to figure out why I should buy from you. When you put it that way, pretty much everybody goes, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, yeah, but that's exactly what you're doing, right? That's exactly what you're saying, is that I will just put something fairly generic out there and leave it to you to figure out why this is relevant to you.
Let's jump into some questions here. JD, I understand that the market for helping founders or really helping companies, it's vast, and there are a lot of service providers out there. And so literally you can hire someone to come in, build your funnel, help you do it, all those things. But then it gets kind of competitive, and I definitely see these offers out there, pay for performance. So I'm going to come and I'm going to do it based on performance, pay me a little bit upfront or pay me nothing, and pay me on what we sell. What do you think about that sort of evolution in the industry?
There's a huge number of these types of agencies out there that will do that for you for a fee-based model or pay for performance. My personal experience, and Ryan's might be different, but my personal experience is that many of these are not what they market themselves to be. In fact, I have a client I'm working with right now who about 3 months ago brought one of these agencies in, and about a month later kicked them out the door because what they said they could do and what they actually delivered were two totally different things. So if you're going to go that route, really do your homework, do your research, however you go about doing that. Make sure, look for reviews, really. Look for other companies that have used them. Look for those honest reviews. Were they good? Were they bad? You can test them out, but I'd be very careful about, just kind of going willy-nilly and using the first one that comes across your radar.
It's definitely an enticing proposition. And I think there's a big difference between companies that just say that to try and get you in versus companies that actually do it. And that's their model, because it can be very lucrative in my experience. Ryan, have we ever had any experience with pay for performance?
Sure. I've done quite a bit of it. Helps founders execute it. Here's my take on it. JD's absolutely right. Like, they're just like any service-based company. They're not all created equal. All right. So you got to do your homework. You got to make sure they can deliver. Here's a different way of looking at this. So assume we're going to do that. Assume we're going to scrutinize their ability to perform and not just fall for the fact that, well, this is the only way we can afford to do this right now, right? You can't, right? You're going to get what you pay for. And if you pay zero, you got zero. Where's the fun in that? Because you're still going to spend time. You may have alienated customers. All kinds of bad stuff can happen. Let's assume that we've vetted this and that we do understand that they normally provide what they say they provide. This can still go really wrong for early stage founders because two things. They still don't know what's going to work within the audience, and they're assuming that the pay for performance agency, contractor, whoever can do this. Generally not the case. These agencies typically rely on helping you to scale something that you already know works. So if you're trying to figure out how to reach people, if you're trying to figure out what messaging is going to work, if you're trying to figure out what does it take from a number of touches in a funnel to bring somebody in and turn them into a customer, probably not the time for pay for performance, right? Because we don't yet know what performance looks like, and we can't scale what's not working. So my typical take on this is to make sure that you know what that looks like for two reasons. One, you want to have a baseline for performance as well. Right? They may set and they say, like, look, we'll get you calls for $300. And you might go, that's amazing. We've never even had a call. $300 sounds like a bargain. Had you done it yourself and learned the process and found out that you could have gotten it for 50 a call, you wouldn't think $300 is such a bargain. But until you know, you don't know. I don't believe in using pay for performance in most cases at early stages where we're still trying to learn. But I think that they can be very valuable ways of testing, can we scale this?
I think it's definitely different. Like, for example, Hollywood agents, sports agents, they're paid for performance, but that's a tried and true model. And you've got this book of business and you can see how it's worked for other people. It's pretty much cookie cutter at that moment in time. But if you're in a startup, you're doing something innovative. Not a lot of people have seen it. If you're really trying to disrupt, you're in totally new territory. There are so many things you don't know. And I think that it's foolish to believe that some pay-for-performance marketing company will come in and actually knows what nobody knows, or else everybody would already be doing it.
Founder-led sales for me.
Let's ask this next question. So back to you, JD. Here's one from the audience. What if the SaaS product user is not the buyer? Example, a company brings on and pays for a new tool for employees to use. Do the users need to buy in first? How do you get user buy-in, then sell to the institution? And I know this founder, and this is a sticking point for sure, challenge they need to overcome.
Yeah, great question. I've actually got a client right in the middle of this as we speak. We were discussing it just this morning with this client. It's a very common problem. It's not unusual at all to have the people that use the product not be the people that pay for the product or service or platform. There's a couple ways to go about it, but one way that I've found that has worked for some of my clients is if your first touch point are those functional users, those lower level folks that are using it but not paying for it, if you can get their buy-in, right, get them maybe on a bit of a free trial if you're able to do that, show them the value, have them then take and be your internal champion, right, inside the company to go up to the buyer level and kind of help you sell, help you get that meeting with the buyer and help the buyer understand the value from their own people's perspective. I'm using this product for 3 weeks and it's helped me do this a third faster or half as much in the cost or whatever that value is. That helps get to that buyer level.
Yeah, I mean, like this is where we use Slack as an example, right? Great case study in exactly this approach where we start by appealing to some specific users within an organization and then letting that propagate out to the rest, right? Slack didn't go and try to sell to a CEO. They didn't try to sell to anybody, the executive team. They sold to people on the dev teams, right? So they said, hey, we've got a clean UX, feature-rich tool that will make chat easier. If they had gone to a CEO and be like, we've got something to make your teams better, it's a clean UX, feature-rich chat tool, and they'd be like, that's not going to change our lives, right? Because they wouldn't have seen it. It would have been impossible from where they sat. So if you'd gone to them as the buyer, you would have gotten a bunch of no's. Instead, they started the other way around. So, but I think it does depend. One of the things that I look for to try to understand which direction you want to go, right? Because you can start from the top and kind of force down. You can try starting at the bottom and getting propagation organically, and then eventually creating a mechanism whereby now you've got so many users, you got to buy this thing. Look at what the power dynamics are, right? Is this the kind of thing, and look at who benefits from this, right? Who gets a bigger bonus at the end of the year if this thing works out, right? Whose daily life is easier if this happens, right? So all of these things start to matter. So if you can look at that from the outside and go, okay, if the CEO says yes to this, it's essentially just a hit to bottom line they may not care about, and they can't see it from here. But if teams start using this, and all of a sudden we're getting better communication, faster turnaround times, more shipped code, now the CEO is going to go, hey, I wonder how this would impact other areas of the business. So it really goes back to like, where's the power dynamic? Does the CEO have a vested interest, or whoever the decision maker is at the higher level? Do they have a vested interest to do this? And do they have the power to create the type of usage that will actually get value from the tool? Because we've also seen the opposite. We had a meeting with a state agency a long time ago where they were interested in evaluating some of our content to deploy to EDCs and SBDCs in the state of Ohio. And they talked to us about this other tool that they had purchased and that they had evaluated, and they bought this software package, and it was it's one of those horrible taxpayer stories where we paid a bunch of money and they bought this tool and then they deployed it, but they never fully trained the staff on how to teach people how to use it. So it never really got out. And we were like, well, how many people are using it? Like, well, we haven't got enough people to buy into the training yet, so nobody's actually using it. How many years have we been paying for it? 3. Oh, great. Guess
Ouch.
what? The director at the time of this particular organization found out at the same time that we did. He was not particularly pleased. We're seeing that meeting. I've never watched somebody's blood pressure go up so fast because he got the bad news at the same time. We were like, that's really weird. And he's like, didn't know about this. And sorry. Pay attention to those dynamics. Think about like not just who would buy this or who would use this, but when we get into the dynamics around where to start within an organization, think about what that path of least resistance is going to be, how we build the type of support, where the value will be seen, who's going to care most about it.
I love what you said about dynamics. So I'll end with this and we can just jump on the next question. Tale of two startups. Startup A, one of my startups, interviewed at a Y Combinator. They said, we like it, but we don't like the way you're selling it. You're using sales channels, people, they don't scale. We don't like it. And they gave me a great idea. And so we took the product, and it was a B2B SaaS product. And we were trying to sell to the HR teams. We're trying to sell to the executive suite. And then we changed the product where employees could onboard themselves and start playing around with it and talk to each other and invite their fellow employees. And then next thing you know, their managers hear about this and they're calling me up saying, all my employees have taken this. Now, how do we actually use it? And I had literally Target, like a gal come to me. She said, yeah, our department at Target started using it. And I said, I've never spoken with Target. I have no idea how that happened. And still to this day, right? So that's startup A. But then at the same time, startup B was another startup. This was out of China. We were trying to sell to the HR departments. And because we need the CEOs to sign up, but we didn't want to approach the CEO. So we thought, let's get the HR departments to buy in. But then what ended up happening was the CEOs didn't see the value. So instead, we went right to the CEO. We didn't go to the front line, the functional users. We went right to the decision maker, and we did a content marketing campaign. We did all this executive coaching, and that broke the doors open. So the dynamics were different in each company, in each industry. And that's illustrating, Ryan, what you're saying about let's look at the dynamics and figure out our best way in. Perfect. Okay, this next question is going to be really fascinating, come for both of you. You said, Ryan, stop selling, start helping. But Ryan, didn't we just have this conversation about selling? What do you mean when you say this?
Look, especially at the early stages, and that was what this was geared towards. At the early stages, we've got to be able to get the foot in the door. We've got to be able to develop a relationship. We've got to be able to stick around. If you're trying to sell a B2B SaaS solution, and their first question is, well, who else is this working for? And the answer is, nobody's bought it yet. You're going to keep getting the same conversation and the same answer over and over again, right? In a lot of cases, they may want to see social proof. They may want to see efficacy. They may want to see outcomes. And so very frequently, we have to give something else. You have to sell something else first. And the easiest thing to sell is help, right? And you could actually sell it. You can give it away. What I've always found, and early stage founders can be really hesitant to this. They're like, but we got to get some money in the door. I was like, okay, cool. So you want to keep just banging on doors that keep saying no? Is that going to help? No, right? Try to get yourself into a position where people are more likely to buy from you. How do we do that? Do they like you? Do they trust you? Have you already done something for them? Have you added value to their lives such that they would say yes, right? Imagine, let's use a really dumb example here. You walk up to somebody on the street and you're like, buy this food, buy this Persian food. And they're like, I've never tried Persian food before, man. I don't know what you're talking about, man. Cool, okay? We don't want to give away our value. Early on, founders get really scared. They're like, but we got to get money, can't give away our value. And then I'll talk to them like, okay, Ryan, we'll give away some value. What do? Did they give away anything really helpful? They're like, all right, I've got this Persian food and I really want you to try some of it, but I want to give away my secret sauce. I want to give my value. Here's some of the white rice. Try this. And we give away something that inherently doesn't have any value and isn't helpful.
Okay, I get it.
It doesn't help me to understand whether or not I want to try Persian food. You just gave me something that's completely bland and tasteless. Right? So often the appetizer that we offer, the help that we're trying to bring, like we try to limit the amount of our value that we're giving away because we're scared to give away the value. And in doing so, then we're asking people, we're saying like, hey, the thing I gave you didn't really like, but if you pay me, I'll give you something good. Who in their right mind trusts you in that situation? The answer is nobody, right? So I've always found the easiest way to do this is just be over the top helpful. Try to solve people's problems, whether that directly aligns with you getting paid or not at the early stages. Sometimes we have to earn our ability to sell. And sometimes that's just helping.
And that's why I like to tell founders all the time, they say to me, how come you're so helpful? And they're not paying me anything. And I say, my philosophy is I'm going to be so helpful. My free stuff, I want it to be more valuable than the stuff you pay for, so that later on you feel so guilty you just want to write me a check. I make that agreement and they're like, thank you. And those are some of the best relationships that continue to evolve and actually end up being very lucrative. JD, you're a sales guy. If you see this, stop selling, start helping, what goes through your mind?
Well, pretty much exactly what Ryan was just saying. When you go in and you start pushing that hard sell, especially to somebody that doesn't know you, doesn't yet trust you, may not even like you yet, you're gonna have a really hard time getting anything done. But again, when you come back to that point that Ryan made of, start off slowly, right? Show a little value, give maybe a little something away, be helpful, show that you can actually solve whatever the problem is that they have. And you're willing to take a little bit of time, you have to figure out what that length of time you can deal with, but a little bit of time to show some value, to be helpful and show that you're a person that can be trusted. And this is often not a very quick process, but it's worth the effort if you have the runway to do so. Start to build up your market of paying customers. And to come back to an earlier point in the conversation, Ryan mentioned using LinkedIn, and to use this as an example. When you're out there sharing content on LinkedIn, I think you know where I'm going with this, Ed. Ryan, when you go out there and you're putting out that valuable content, that thought leadership, whatever it is on LinkedIn, as an earlier stage startup, somebody who maybe doesn't have the biggest follower count or first degree connections count, you create, you take some time, you create this really valuable, maybe even visually appealing content, you put it out there and 3 people see it. How do you get that in front of a wider audience? Because I have a client having that issue right now. And again, I think Ed knows where I'm going with this.
Depends if there's a bit of a budget and we feel like that there is some reason, but sometimes we can't. So this is something I explained to somebody a few days ago. Sometimes we can't market. We have to sell. What do I mean by that? We may just have to go direct. Like we may not be able to put content out and bring people to us. In the beginning, we may just have to go to people. If you know your audience is on LinkedIn, you can probably tell me who they are, meaning we know their job titles, we know the size company they work in, we know the type of revenue it has, we know the region that they're from, whatever. If we know that, we can just do direct outreach. Maybe that isn't even direct outreach. Maybe it's indirect outreach. Maybe I'm commenting on their posts. I'm looking for public signaling that says, you are thinking about the problem that I solve. All right. So if I can see somebody out there going, oh man, another rough conversation with my co-founder, I can jump right into that conversation because I've had those conversations. I have hundreds of those conversations with people. I can be extremely empathetic and I can say, man, I know exactly what that's like. All right. How did it end? Where did it go? Jump into the conversation. Find that public signal that says this person is in a point where they're receptive to the type of thing that I do, the type of help that I can provide, and then just lean in. Sometimes we cannot get there by just offering content. Now, the other side of that would be, doesn't matter. If you post that and it gets 3 views, but you know who your segment is, and you have a little bit of a budget, you can pay to play. We can push that out in front of them. We can make sure that those people get 3, 4, 5, 6 impressions of your content. And then we start to understand, does that actually move the needle, right? When I show where I'm helpful, when I offer up resources, when I bring my expertise to the table, and we know we're getting it in front of people. That's the beauty of LinkedIn ads and that sponsored content mechanism, is that we can guarantee we're getting eyeballs on our stuff. So it depends a little bit on the situation, whether they have a budget or not, whether they're clear on their segment or not, and whether they have some reasonable understanding as to whether that content is going to resonate, or they're willing to pay to find out. Right? I had this conversation with somebody today. They wanted me to walk them through how to construct that funnel that I described earlier, that LinkedIn funnel. And I said, before we go and do this, before we go and build all the content, let's buy some of that traffic. Let's buy some of those users directly. They will be more expensive doing it this way, but let's get in conversation with a couple of those people to make sure that we want to spend the time, money, and effort to build that more complicated funnel. Tell the same thing to anybody that's like, we want to build organic traffic to our site. We've talked about this on this call before, I think, but if you want to build organic traffic to your site, I'm going to tell you, cool, let's go spend a couple $100 to $1,000 on paid search ads to see what happens when that traffic shows up. Before we spend the next month and a half cranking copy and 18 months waiting for the SEO results to catch up, let's see if this is a party we even want to attend. Let's make sure that the folks that show up here are the people we want. So how can we short circuit that process? So depending on the dynamics of that situation, JD, there's a number of ways that I would approach that.
Yeah, and what I was getting to is there's something we're doing, for those on a very tight budget, there's a way to, for lack of a better term, hack the LinkedIn algorithm to over time, not overnight, but over time, start to get your content out to a wider audience, spending no additional money other than what you're already, paying for your Startups.com membership, which is this funnily titled thing called a LinkedIn posting party.
Yeah.
So if you want LinkedIn to be an effective tool for you 6 months from now, you need to start today and put it to effect.
We have a lot of fun at those parties, and that's where I just want to encourage everyone, just put it out there. I tell founders all the time, they say, well, I don't know if my YouTube videos are going to work. And I say, would you drive across town to pitch to 10 potential customers? Yes, I would. Okay, great. So you're going to record a video and you're complaining that you have 10 views on your video, but that's what you just did. And if you're going to learn from it, it's so valuable. So founders, you just got to get out there and not worry. There's so many ways, as Ryan has demonstrated, that you can spike growth. We are here to help you. And this is where we're going to end it. So Ryan, first what's your invitation? All the founders are going to be watching this who are part of Startups.com community. How can they get more help and approach you?
Sure. If you're already one of the members, jump into the Slack channels. Hit me at Ryan@Startups.com. If you're not a member and don't have access to the Slack, hit me at Ryan@Startups.com. Catch me on LinkedIn. You'll see content all over the place. And I am not shy about jumping into founder conversations.
JD?
Yeah, if you're already a part of Startups.com, I do office hours up to 4 times a week. Hit me up wherever you find the office hours on the portal, and happy to have that conversation.
Make sure, everyone, check us out at Startups.com. You can get all the resources there. It is extremely helpful. It's where I got started. I love this community, and you get to interact and rub elbows and ask questions of Ryan and JD and so many other experts. That's it for us. We're going to continue this series in terms of traction and growth hacking and customer acquisition every Wednesday. Thursday, tomorrow, we're all about the Q&A. We're going to be answering questions. We got Will, founder and CEO of Startups.com, joining us, and then we're back in the saddle again, doing the other cycle pitch decks on Tuesday. And then hopefully we see you next Wednesday if you want to continue this conversation. JD, Ryan, Jen, thanks so much for helping us out in this one. Thank you to all the other founders out there. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.